A song reaches #1 while being banned from national radio. Another gets quietly buried by its own record label, only to return years later as a classic rock anthem. A third forces its creator to fly across an ocean twice to change 2 words that had nothing to do with why people found it shocking. These aren't failures. These are hits, songs you've heard 1,000 times on oldies stations, tracks that defined a decade. But in the 1970s, radio programmers, retailers, and even chart compilers worked to keep them away from listeners. The songs won anyway. But the path from too dangerous to play to classic rock staple reveals something about how power actually works when it collides with culture. The question isn't why radio banned controversial songs. Censorship has always existed. The question is how songs this controversial became the classics we can't imagine the decade without. Because the 1970s created a strange pattern. The very institutions meant to decide what became a hit, radio stations, record labels, retail chains, kept making the same mistake. They'd identify a song as risky and try to suppress it. That song would then become bigger because of the attempt, sometimes immediately, sometimes only after being rescued years later by audiences who knew better than the gatekeepers. What we think of as inevitable classic rock was often anything but inevitable when it first appeared. These weren't songs that succeeded despite controversy. They succeeded through a more complicated process, one where institutional resistance, audience demand, and pure accident combined in ways no one planned. The Rolling Stones released this track in April 1971. It went to #1 in the United States and Canada. On paper, that looks like straightforward success, a hit single from an established band doing what established bands do. But the airplay told a different story. Stations across the country simply stopped playing it, sometimes through formal bans announced to staff, more often through quiet decisions made in program meetings that never got documented. The lyrics referenced slavery, interracial relationships, and violence in ways that created immediate discomfort. Some programmers cited community standards when explaining their decisions to colleagues. Others didn't explain at all. The song just stopped appearing in rotation. The strange part is that the controversy helped the band as much as it hurt the song. Being too dangerous for some radio markets reinforced the Stones' outlaw image, which was exactly the brand they'd been cultivating for years. Stations that banned it looked cautious and out of touch. Stations that played it looked bold and progressive. The Stones benefited either way, even while the song itself faced genuine restrictions. What's less discussed is how the band itself later stepped back from the track. By the 2020s, Mick Jagger had largely retired it from live performances, acknowledging in interviews that the lyrics were problematic and that times had changed. Keith Richards was less concerned, but even he admitted the song made people uncomfortable in ways the band hadn't fully anticipated in 1971. The track that radio tried to contain eventually became something even its creators treated carefully, suggesting that what seemed like just provocative lyrics at the time carried historical and racial weight that took decades to fully acknowledge. The censorship was wrong, but so was the assumption that the song was simply being misunderstood. When Derek and the Dominos released this in 1970, radio programmers didn't know what to do with it. The structure confused them. The song ran over 7 minutes in its full form, built in 2 distinct parts that didn't follow typical single formatting. The piano coda felt like a separate piece entirely. For program directors trying to maintain tight playlists and predictable flow, it was a problem. The song stalled commercially, reaching only modest chart positions. It was a respectable underperformer given Eric Clapton's fame and the guitar work's obvious quality, but nothing close to a defining hit. Record stores reported decent sales, but nothing exceptional. the label moved on to other priorities. Then in 1972, Atlantic Records assembled the History of Eric Clapton compilation and decided to reissue the full version as a single. This time, something different happened. The song caught on. It climbed into the top 10 in both the US and UK, effectively rewriting its commercial history 2 years after the original release. The resistance hadn't been moral or political. It was structural and aesthetic. Program directors initially objected to the length and the unconventional two-part structure, preferring to fade early rather than let the whole piece play through. The piano coda seemed indulgent, unnecessary, the kind of thing that worked on an album but not on radio. Only sustained listener demand convinced them to air the sprawling version that's now considered standard. People called stations asking for the full song. DJs who played it got positive feedback. Eventually, the industry consensus shifted from too long and weird to epic and essential, but that shift took time and repeated exposure. Every time that I look in the mirror. Aerosmith released this in 1973. It peaked at number 59 on the Billboard Hot 100. For most songs, that chart position would mark the end of the story, a minor entry in a band's discography that gets forgotten as bigger hits arrive. Program directors found it too slow and dramatic for rock radio. The ballad format didn't fit the high-energy sound most rock stations were cultivating. The band was largely unknown outside the Boston area, which meant stations had no commercial incentive to take a chance on something that didn't fit format expectations. The track never received the national promotional push its later fame suggests it deserved. But certain regional markets, particularly Boston, kept playing it. Individual DJs who believed in the song refused to let it go even after the initial chart run ended. They kept it in rotation through 1974 and into 1975, building a local audience that treated it as a classic before the rest of the country had heard it properly. By 1975 and 1976, after Aerosmith's profile had grown through touring and subsequent releases, the label decided to reissue Dream On as a single. This time it cracked the top 10, vindicating the Boston DJs who'd kept faith with it and proving that the initial commercial failure had been a misreading, not an accurate assessment. The turnaround came from programmers working against early commercial logic rather than following it. Corporate strategy had written the song off as a failed experiment. Late night and album rock DJs rescued it by simply continuing to play what they thought worked, despite what the initial chart performance suggested and despite pressure to move on to newer material. These are the songs that survived despite being misunderstood, mistimed, or misjudged by the industry machinery meant to promote them. We came from Miami, Lou Reed recorded this in London in 1972 with David Bowie and Mick Ronson producing. The entire Transformer album was completed in about 60 hours over 10 days. The song that emerged described transgender Warhol superstars, male prostitution, oral sex, and drug culture in a straightforward manner that should have alarmed broadcast censors in both countries. Reed later called it an outright counterculture song. He had carefully worded it so that those who didn't understand might miss its implications and enjoy it without offense, though he knew listeners would eventually decode its meaning and be upset. Instead of banishment, the song became Radio 1, DJ Tony Blackburn's Record of the Week on the BBC, which had previously banned songs for mentioning God Almighty or Coca-Cola and censored any sexual content. The BBC played it unedited, and the song reached number 10 in the UK and number 16 in the US, Reed's biggest solo hit. Most analyses suggest that BBC censors simply didn't understand what they heard. The coded language of New York's underground scene wasn't familiar to British listeners, and censors listened for more obvious transgressions. By the time advocacy groups and religious organizations pointed out the lyrics' specifics, the song was already popular, and pulling it would have only increased attention. Its success was partly because it slipped past gatekeepers unaware of its content, and partly because, once understood, suppressing it would have only fueled controversy and boosted sales.
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to...
Helen Reddy released this in 1972. Early on, many stations refused to add it to their playlists, dismissing it as too political and strident, language often used to critique women speaking openly about their experiences and demands. The single initially stalled, and Reddy's label at Capitol showed limited enthusiasm, seeing it as niche rather than commercial. Women's organizations then began requesting it, and it gained momentum through word of mouth and TV appearances rather than radio support. Women called stations, questioning why it wasn't played. The song became linked to the women's liberation movement, making it more powerful and threatening to program directors wary of alienating male listeners. A strategic reissue after its use in a TV movie finally pushed hesitant programmers to add it to rotation as demand from audiences grew and commercial pressure mounted. The song climbed the charts on its second attempt, won a Grammy, and became an enduring anthem. Program directors often avoided platforming feminist messages that challenged gender roles and authority, but widespread demand forced their hand. Reddy's Grammy speech thanking God because she makes everything possible fueled controversy but cemented its place in cultural history. What was once too dangerous to play became too popular to suppress, showing that radio's gatekeeping power was real but not absolute when cultural causes prioritized a song.
Since I've got the pill.
When Loretta Lynn released this in 1975, many country stations banned it outright. The song addressed birth control from a woman's perspective, celebrating the freedom contraception gave married women who didn't want more children. For country radio, built on traditional family values and conservative attitudes, this was unacceptable. The controversy limited its chart run, peaking at number 5 on the country chart despite Lynn's superstar status, large fan base, and track record. Under normal circumstances, a new Loretta Lynn single would have reached the top 3. The ban cost her measurable commercial success. Lynn said rural women privately thanked her after concerts or wrote letters about how it spoke to their experiences. Meanwhile, male programmers and industry gatekeepers tried to keep it off the air, creating a divide between country music's public image and what its audience, especially women, privately experienced. The controversy extended beyond the music industry, fueling broader debates about women's rights and sexual liberation in the decade. It became a landmark in country music's uneasy relationship with women's autonomy and the gap between the genre's public image and its listeners' lives. Lynn defended it courageously, arguing country music had always reflected real life, including these issues. Her stand, despite personal and commercial costs, made her a pioneer in addressing issues the industry preferred to ignore. The Sex Pistols released this in May 1977, timed deliberately for Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee year, as the nation prepared to celebrate 25 years of her reign. The timing was as provocative as the content, a calculated confrontation with national identity amid patriotic celebrations. The BBC banned it immediately from all broadcasts, including daytime radio. Radio 1 controller Charles Millellan called it in gross bad taste. Most commercial stations followed suit without waiting for guidance. The ban was comprehensive, suggesting institutional panic. Record stores were pressured not to stock it. Major chains like Woolworths, W.H. Smith, and Boots pulled the single. Venues canceled concerts. The band tried to perform it from a boat on the Thames during the Jubilee on June 7th, blasting it through giant speakers past Parliament. Police chased and arrested 11 when the boat docked. Despite being barred from radio and retail, the song reached number 2 on the UK singles chart, selling up to 150,000 copies daily in late May and early June. Extraordinary for a song without mainstream airplay or distribution. Some claims say it outsold the number 1 that week, Rod Stewart's ballad, but was suppressed via chart manipulation. Most don't realize institutional resistance extended beyond radio. W.H.S. Smith displayed the weekly chart with a blank spot where the song should have been. Chart authorities faced pressure to downplay its sales. Industry publications debated whether to report on it. This made the record a rare case of radio, retail, state, and industry opposition against a single 3-minute song. The coordinated effort signaled it wasn't just about controversy, but about containing what the Pistols represented, a challenge to authority that couldn't be easily absorbed or sold. This moment revealed the power of radio gatekeeping. The BBC could ban a song, retailers could refuse to stock it, charts could be manipulated. But when a song truly resonated, resistance became fuel, making the song more vital, necessary, and powerful than mere commercial success. Donna Summer released this in 1975. The BBC and multiple U.S. stations banned it due to Summer's extended vocalizations throughout the 16-minute album version. Radio programmers deemed the moans and breathy delivery too explicit for broadcast. Some stations played a heavily edited single late at night during safe harbor hours. Others dropped it after receiving complaints from listeners and religious groups. Most don't know that the recording that caused moral panic was initially a studio experiment producer Giorgio Moroder doubted would be releasable. Summer was embarrassed and wanted it kept as a demo. When Casablanca Records boss Neil Bogart heard it, he believed it would be a hit, but the label hesitated to push the full version to radio due to FCC pressure and advertiser backlash. Disco partly existed outside radio's control. Nightclub DJs didn't answer to advertisers or the FCC. They answered to dancers who wanted the full 16-minute version. The shorter radio edit still reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. The full version became a sensation in clubs where the extended runtime fit perfectly into DJ sets and created an experience that radio couldn't replicate even if it wanted to. The song launched Summer's career and demonstrated that disco could handle adult themes radio wouldn't touch, creating a parallel distribution system where cultural impact happened outside traditional gatekeepers. The controversy also revealed class and cultural divisions in how music was consumed. Radio served a broad daytime audience that included children. Nightclubs served adults who'd specifically chosen to be there. The same song could be too dangerous in one context and perfectly appropriate in another, but radio's attempt to enforce its standards across all contexts was already failing. The Kinks released this song in 1970, and it was banned by the BBC, not due to its themes of a romantic encounter with a transgender woman, but because Ray Davies mentioned Coca-Cola by name in a lyric about champagne tasting like the soft drink. This violated the BBC's strict rules against product placement and commercial references in music broadcasts. Davies had to suspend the band's American tour, fly from Minnesota to London, and re-record the line, substituting Coca-Cola with Cherry Cola. Dissatisfied with the initial take, feeling the vocal performance was off, he traveled back to Chicago for a show, then returned to London on June 3, 1970, to re-record until Satisfied. Ironically, The BBC had no issue with a song addressing gender fluidity and sexual ambiguity, but censored a brand mention. This revealed the arbitrary nature of broadcasting standards, often disconnected from the actual content. In the U.S., many stations faded out the song before its explicit ending. In Britain, once the Coca-Cola reference was removed, the song reached number 2 without further censorship, as broadcasters either misunderstood or ignored its true subject matter. The song became a signature track for the Kinks, introducing mainstream audiences to themes of sexual identity rarely addressed in pop music at the time. Ray Davies said he wrote it to introduce listeners to characters they might not encounter otherwise, people living outside the mainstream. For many, especially those feeling different or rejected, the song was deeply personal. Its straightforward acceptance was groundbreaking, free of judgment or moral panic, merely depicting an encounter and the realization that appearances can deceive. Its lack of moral judgment made it powerful and radical, more than just a political statement. Elvis Costello released a critique of commercial broadcasting in 1978 with the song Radio Radio, which directly attacked the radio industry for sacrificing artistic integrity to commercial interests, favoring safe music that avoided challenging listeners or threatening advertisers. Industry executives viewed it as hostile and responded accordingly. Costello's intent was clearly confrontational. In the UK, programmers were hesitant about a single that openly accused them of corruption and creative cowardice. The song received limited airplay compared to more subdued tracks, with some stations avoiding it entirely and others playing it but making pointed remarks about artists biting the hand that feeds them. The controversy escalated when Costello appeared on Saturday Night Live in 1978. He was scheduled to perform Less Than Zero, but stopped midway, stating, "There's no reason to do this song here," and launched into Radio Radio, instead defying the show's producers' instructions. This act of defiance angered NBC executives and led to reports of a long ban from SNL that lasted until 1989. For Costello, being banned for performing a song criticizing media censorship was a powerful statement, reinforcing his stance more effectively than any interview could. Across 9 notable cases, the term dangerous rarely indicated proven harm. Instead, it signified threats to institutions that relied on moral, political, or commercial boundaries. Songs addressing contraception, feminism, queer identities, anti-monarchism, and radio critique challenged these limits. Unconventional ballads like Dream On and Layla disrupted radio standards of what a hit should sound and look like, both structurally and aesthetically. History shows radio's gatekeeping was powerful, but not absolute. Listeners found ways to access desired music, and outside movements championed songs aligned with their values. These dangerous songs became classics that stations now cite to represent the 1970s, familiar to audiences unaware of their original controversies. Songs like Brown Sugar, now controversial for different reasons, Walk on the Wild Side, Dream On, and I Am Woman all persisted, not because of radio promotion, but because they connected deeply with audiences. Efforts to suppress only amplified their importance. This decade showed that impactful music often challenged gatekeepers' comfort zones, revealing their narrow visions and arbitrariness. Radio deemed these tracks too dangerous, but audiences saw them as essential. 50 years later, history confirms who was right. The banned songs outlasted attempts to contain them, becoming iconic. This reversal teaches a crucial lesson. Control attempts rarely go as planned. Resistance often amplifies what is targeted, and audiences are smarter and more persistent than gatekeepers expect. If this story resonates with you and shifts how you hear these songs, perhaps the true legacy isn't the bands, but what came after. Proof that vital music will find its audience despite efforts to stop it. And if you want to keep exploring and enjoying the songs that shaped music as we know it, subscribe and check out this video next. Thanks for watching.